Welcome to the NatRefs Show, a weekly podcast on the ever-changing world of natural refrigerants, brought to you by Sheco with support from component maker Teco. Today we will be discussing the major news items impacting the world of natural refrigerants. My name is Michael Garry, editor of Sheco's Accelerate America magazine and North American editor for Sheco. I will be hosting today's podcast from Sheco's New York area bureau outside of New York City. I'm joined today by two colleagues in Brussels, Belgium, Charlotte McLaughlin, who is Sheco's European-based reporter, and Dario Belwamini, project officer and market analyst for the market development team at Sheco. It's good to be with you both. Hello.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Okay, so we'll also be joined shortly by Andrew Williams, who is Sheco's European editor, and Devin Yoshimoto, who is Sheco's Asian Pacific reporter, who attended the Atmosphere China event sponsored by Sheco this week in China, and will be talking about some of the natural refrigerant news that we heard at that conference. Okay, and we'll also be hearing from Charlotte about Germany being challenged in regard to its treatment of Daimler as far as the use of refrigerants in motor vehicle air conditioning. You'll hear from me about low-charge ammonia and from Dario about the LifeFront project. So we'll start today's podcast with a report from Andrew and Devin on Atmosphere China.
Thanks, Michael. Here we are in Beijing at the conclusion of Atmosphere China, the first ever atmosphere conference on natural refrigerants to be held in the country in Beijing at the Sheraton Grand Dongchen Hotel. The conference has been going on for 2 days, brought together policymakers, end users and leading industry associations working in the HVAC&R sector and with natural refrigerants here in China. I'm with my colleague Devin Yoshimoto from the Asia Pacific office, who's going to give us his initial insights into how the conference went.
Yeah, first of all, we just spent the last day and a half furiously covering this conference, and we've already had live coverage go up and some articles go up, and we've been recording videos with a lot of the sponsors and a lot of the people who are participated in the conference. First of all, I think we just want to say that right now we're feeling good about how the conference went, basically in terms of engagement with the audience, which is actually one of the things that I think stood out the most to me yesterday and today. We had questions go out on Slido. We had questions come in from the audience. We had really kind of back and forth discussions, more so than I've ever seen at any other atmosphere conference recently on stage and in between the speakers. Why don't we just first talk about kind of the main takeaways from each of the session. Yesterday we had the Technology Leadership Roundtable where leading technology suppliers from overseas and in China took to the stage. We've had probably close to 8 to 9 of the representatives from those companies speak. What was your main takeaway, Andrew, basically from this session for the Technology Leadership Roundtable yesterday? What was the main message that these technology suppliers were trying to get across to the audience here in China, you think?
I think what we're seeing is as the global HFC phase down put in place by the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol gets going, and as China continues with its HCFC phase down, what we're seeing is that both domestic and international technology suppliers are very much ready to start selling these natural refrigerant-based alternative solutions on the Chinese market. I think the market has big potential, but we're also seeing a desire from the multinational companies based outside China to come to the country, find out more, find out about the HVAC&R sector and what's needed, and very much have an exchange between the different markets to make these solutions work here in China.
We had a chance to speak to a lot of these companies one-on-one because we were recording interviews with them. And I think one of the main things that stood out when we talked to them was that they really established in this discussion the sense that now it really is the time for them to start leading the market. And I think one of the key quotes I heard from Ricardo Maciel, who is the president of the light commercial division for NEDEC, he said that right now China is in the beginning stage of a complete transformation of the economy that's focusing more on energy efficiency and sustainability, to companies and consumers who are becoming more environmentally conscious. So as this starts to really turn in China, one of the biggest markets in the world, these technology suppliers want to be visible, and they want to send the message that they're ready to supply natural refrigerant solutions in all sectors, commercial, light commercial, industrial, especially. So I think that was the main message of that session. Do you agree?
Sure, I would agree. And I think if we look at the situation of the Chinese HVAC&R market right now, obviously there's a lot of HCFCs still out there in the economy. And so what we're seeing is a unique opportunity for China to jump straight from HCFCs, bypassing HFCs, to natural refrigerants. And the technology solutions are there, and this is the message that a lot of the international suppliers were here in Beijing to make.
That was one of the key opportunities that they recognized in that panel. And then the very next day, the very first session for today, day 2, was the policy session. And that was exactly what was highlighted in the policy session, is that China is in the middle of phasing out HCFCs right now. And we had speakers from the Ministry of Environmental Protection, Mr. Zhang Jifeng, speakers from UNIDO, from the Environmental Investigation Agency, and also from the International Institute of Ammonia Refrigeration take to the stage. And one of the main things that Zhang Jifeng identified was that China is in the middle of this transition, but there is that opportunity to recognize the long-term solutions right now, where they're still transitioning in the beginning, and then take that opportunity to jump forward and create a competitive advantage in China by going with natural refrigerants rather than having a short-term vision with the transitional phase. Is that what you think Mr. Jifeng was talking about?
Sure. I mean, I think the precise details of this will be laid out in the coming years as China begins to implement the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol,
which they're in the middle of discussing ratification for right now.
Right now. But what struck me about Mr. Jifeng's intervention was, despite the fact that the ratification is ongoing, there seems to be an impressive degree of forward thinking. Mr. Jifeng was talking about how all the controlled substances under the Kigali Amendment will be phased out by 2045. So this is a long-term view, but it's an impressive trajectory, and it's promising from the point of view of the market for alternatives to these substances, including natural refrigerants, that such a schedule is already in place. And he came up with some strong statements there. So in normal industries, we will never use HFCs. We have a very clear direction forward. We're developing alternatives. Now, he did mention special industries working with flammable refrigerants as exceptions here, where the evolution may take longer. I think in the coming months and years, we'll see what these statements mean concretely and how this is going to translate on the ground in the HVAC&R sector. But certainly promising trajectory for phasing down these substances and adopting natural refrigerant alternatives.
And it's a clear message from the government. It's something that every market, every country needs, is a clear direction coming from the government, basically, in terms of policy and anticipating the future. So what we saw then afterwards was that the associations took to the stage. The top 4 associations for the HVAC&R industry in China were together on stage, united, basically there to discuss the opportunity for natural refrigerants in each of their sectors. We had the China Chain Store Franchise Association, CCFA, which represents more than 1,000 retailers in China, including the big ones like Metro, Starbucks, McDonald's, and international and local retailers. We had the China Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Industry Association, CRAA, which represents a lot of the commercial and industrial sector. And we also had the Chinese Association of Refrigeration. And finally, we had the China Household Electrical Appliances Association, which represents a lot of the market for the household and domestic units. And so we got that clear direction set in the policy session from Mr. Zhang Jifeng. What did we learn from the industry associations? They were there and they were united. What was the main message from them, you think?
So they're also very focused on how we can accelerate the so-called green revolution in the cold chain technologies, said the representative of the China Chain Store and Franchise Association,
Ms. Wang Wenhua.
Ms. Wang, exactly. And what she's focusing on is that industry is ready, but there needs to be some help from government. And this came in terms of reforming the safety standards in a manner that can help to promote natural refrigerant alternatives. And what was interesting is that this dovetailed very well with how Mr. Jifeng concluded his presentation. So industry's calling for that. Well, the government is ready to do that. We had Mr. Jifeng state, our current domestic standards are not helpful for promoting alternatives. We're going to make new standards. We're revising standards to improve safety levels and promote natural refrigerants, which are the future market trend. So that's very interesting, and it has to be promising for the trajectory that China as a country and that Chinese and international companies operating in China, it has to be promising that there's this united front here between government and industry about how natural refrigerants are the way forward, and that there are a number of obstacles in the current regulatory framework that will need to be changed to allow this market push to happen.
Key obstacles, training, education, standards, I think was repeated over and over and over again by everybody. There's a lot of work to do. Everybody, I think, today has the same idea of what the future is going to hold, but how we get there and the steps that we have to take to get there in terms of revising standards, updating them, making sure that the implementation of this new technology is safe and energy efficient and done properly by the industry is very clear. That need is very clear. And we're going to keep track and see how this develops over the coming years. So a lot of trends were identified within the industry by the associations: commercial, retail, fresh food, industrial. Ammonia is seen as dangerous since some accidents happened in 2013, and that actually led to the uptake of cascade ammonia and CO2 systems, which is what Jin Ma said, who is the deputy director of the Cold Storage and Cold Processing Committee from Chinese Association of Refrigeration. So some key trends identified, and finally we had the future of the industry end user panel. Right before we had a lot of technology case studies presented, but some of the key highlights of the end user panel. What were some of the key highlights you thought you saw from the end user panel?
Yeah, so kicking off our end user panel was Alan Lin. He's head of facility management at Metro China. Metro is the German multinational food retailer, and in Germany they have an impressive F-gas program for replacing F-gases with natural refrigerant alternatives where economically feasible to do so. And we're now seeing the beginning of the translation of this policy into China. And on the cover story of the first edition of our Accelerate China magazine, which was available at the show this week, we had a feature on Chinese retail's first CO2 transcritical store.
Yes.
And so there's a beginning of what we expect to become a growing trend in Chinese retail. We've seen CO2 transcritical being phenomenally successful in Europe, and these multinationals are now bringing it to China. That's one.
Yeah, and Alan was here. He just made a really clear statement. I'm here today to talk about that and to represent that. He was on the cover of the magazine, which we had on everywhere in the conference, and also we're going to have the store tour tomorrow, where a bunch of the attendees registered to actually go down to the store, the first transcritical CO2 store, which is here in Beijing, to actually check out the system firsthand. And there were many people very, very interested in that.
Right, and moving on from food retail, we also had Nestle,
Yes.
and so Mr. Daiqian Zhang, he's the product engineering manager at Nestle Health Science. He was presenting how Nestle's global strategy for adopting natural refrigerants is being translated into China. And so he had figures in terms of the penetration of natural refrigerants into industrial applications around the world. Globally, Nestle is already at 91% natural refrigerants.
And you've actually been to the Nestle factory.
Yeah, I've been to a Nestle factory, the Nescafé factory, and also a Nestle data center on the shores of Lake Geneva near Nestle's global corporate headquarters in Vevey, and seen at first hand how these ammonia systems are serving Nestle in Europe. Now, their strategy globally is no different. The expertise is there already. They have been using natural refrigerant systems for industrial applications since 1986.
And light commercial for their freezer units.
And exactly, in light commercial, they very ambitious strategies for using hydrocarbons in light commercial refrigeration. And
so you've seen the company. We all know that Nestle is a leader globally implementing natural refrigerants for a long time. Were you surprised to see how much they've been doing here in China, which, by the way, they mentioned and they recognized that China is the second largest market for Nestle globally?
No, because we know that Nestle are ambitious adopters of natural refrigerants worldwide, and we know that they have the expertise in headquarters and in other areas of the world, and it is no surprise to see this being translated into China. Now, having said that, there are of course some challenges in operating in China. So I think this is not just applying to Nestle, but everybody. So these end user companies have ambitious natural refrigerant implementation strategies, but nonetheless the Chinese market is different to other parts of the world. For example, Europe, I'm thinking in terms of availability of components for natural refrigerant systems, availability of training for maintenance technicians and installers, contractors, everybody involved in the cold chain for fitting and working on these systems, and awareness among the end users themselves of the implications of having a natural refrigerant system. I think this is where the China market's slightly different, and all of our ATMO participants were unanimous in agreeing that this is an area that we can work on in order to roll out the implementation of these natural refrigerant systems more smoothly and more quickly.
The enthusiasm was there. It was clear. I mean, we could talk about all of the highlights we saw today, not including the rest of the end user panel, like Spar was talking about their implementation of R290. They gave a really good presentation. And then also the Shandong Meijia Group, who's a food processor, really large food processor in China, who's really great presentation on their use of ammonia and ammonia refrigeration systems. But I think what we can really just take away from this whole conference is that the enthusiasm and then the engagement was more than we thought was going to happen. I mean, we were expecting it, but I think it was even more than we thought. And just talking to the people and talking to everybody, and even talking to the suppliers from overseas, what they said was what they're seeing here in China is that there is this interest and this engagement in natural refrigerant systems that they weren't expecting. And they weren't expecting that this market and this industry would be as clued up or as clued in to what's happening around the world and paying attention to what's happening around the world as much as they thought. And it's actually given them real optimism, especially from today, from the last couple of years, and then going forward in the next couple of years. So I think we're really excited to see what's going to be happening here in China over the next couple of years. We're going to be excited to cover it for the foreseeable future. And I think that's it for today.
Right, and what better way to sum up our discussion with the final statement of Mr. Zhifeng in his presentation: the promotion of natural refrigerants will lead us to a brighter future in China. I think that's very much the message of the entire conference, and it'll be interesting to track this in the coming months and years. Michael, back to you.
Thank you, Andrew and Devin, for that great report. Next up, we'll hear from Charlotte about what's going on in Germany regarding Daimler and the motor vehicle air conditioning. Charlotte?
So to start off with, this story has been going on for quite a while now. It all started because Daimler, under the MAC directive, along with many other European car companies, is required to have its air conditioning under a certain GWP amount. Daimler's options were either to go for CO2 or to go for R1234YF. It said that the CO2 technology hadn't developed yet, but it didn't want to use R1234YF because it said it was flammable and they were concerned about safety. The European Commission pointed out to Germany that there are no safety considerations, and they thought that Germany should reprimand Daimler for continuing to use HFCs in cars. So they were using R134A. Then what happened was, because Germany said that they were allowing Daimler, and Daimler had petitioned to delay their date to start using a lower GWP amount in cars. And the European Commission said actually Germany had not been implementing the MAC directive properly. So the European Commission referred the case and challenged them in the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg in 2015. So now what has happened is the Advocate General, who was involved in the case, Paolo Mangosi, released a statement saying that Germany was in the wrong to allow Daimler to keep using R134A in air conditioning in cars. So Paolo Mangosi said that Germany was wrong to allow Daimler to use HFCs in cars, and it had not implemented the MAC directive properly. So we think that soon there will be a final decision by the European Court of Justice, because very often the ECJ just goes with whatever the Advocate General proposes in most cases. So it seems likely that the ECJ will agree that Germany violated the MAC directive. Since this, though, Daimler has said that it's going to start using CO2 in air conditioning in cars.
Yeah, this is kind of a messy situation. So just to kind of boil it down, basically, the German car companies, like particularly Daimler, was supposed to use 1234YF, but they didn't use it because they didn't like it because of the potential flammability issues, which are very real issues. In fact, we're seeing in the U.S. studies about the byproducts of that, which include hydrofluoric acid, which can be extremely toxic. So there is a legitimate concern about using that refrigerant in automobiles. And what they would rather use is CO2, which you're saying they're now going to be using. Is that correct?
Yeah. So also during the summer, we came out with a story about this, that Daimler has now purchased a load of CO2 compressors for air conditioning in mass-produced cars. So that's like ordinary vehicles. Before they had CO2 in their luxury cars, but now they've purchased a load of CO2 compressors from Sanden for mobile air conditioning mass-produced cars. So they've said they're committed to using CO2, and it's likely that they will start using it instead of using R134A. Yeah.
So then it'll be a moot point. I mean, then there won't be any issue for them as far as the MAC directive is concerned.
No, so the MAC directive states that F-gases are prohibited in cars, in car air conditioning from 2017 for GWPs of 150 or more. So that essentially means that from 2017 they shouldn't have had HFCs in their cars, in their mobile air conditioning in their cars.
So they're gonna, if they stop using HFCs and start using CO2, that's not sufficient. They have to pay some sort of penalty for having not done so. Is that the idea?
It's not likely if they will have some penalty. This particular court case with the ECJ was directed at Germany for not properly implementing the MAC directive. So whether Daimler is ending up going to be fined in this case, there's already been legal challenges from Germany against Daimler. The Federal Environment Agency actually told Daimler that they had to recall over 100,000 cars that were using R134A in their air conditioning in 2017 because they were violating the MAC directive. So those cars that were placed on the road, those should be fitted with CO2.
Okay. So that's the real impact, is that those cars would have to be recalled.
That was last year, and then since then they have had loads of CO2 systems develop. So it seems likely that their new cars will start using CO2. I haven't heard anything about them getting fines or being brought to the ECJ or anything like that over the MAC directive. So, but there may be more developments. I mean, this story has been going on since 2015. So, so the good news out of this is basically that Daimler is starting to use CO2 technology in cars. That's really like the success story of this, is that, you know, these legal challenges and constant like reprimands about them using R134A has made them speed up their use of CO2 technology, which is good news for the industry, is that a major car company is investing in CO2.
Very good. Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, we're going to turn now to the United States. What's going on here? We recently had the IIAR conference, natural refrigeration conference in Colorado, where low charge ammonia was one of the main topics. And I want to talk a bit about what I learned about low charge ammonia at that conference. But first, I want to announce the first worldwide survey on low charge ammonia has been launched by SHECO. In particular, our SHECO base division launched the survey to help gather information for what we're putting together, namely a world guide to low charge ammonia, which will be published later this year. So this is the first worldwide, this will be the first worldwide guide on low charge ammonia technology. And so we're doing this survey to gather the knowledge and lessons learned from stakeholders around the world. And this will form a crucial part of the world guide that we're putting together. So I encourage our listeners to who are involved with low charge ammonia or ammonia refrigeration in general to take the survey. You can find it on ammonia21.com. We did an article about this. You can scroll down to the article and there's a link to the survey. If you don't want to look for the article, you just go to ammonia21.com and type in the words worldwide survey, worldwide being one word, worldwide survey, and it'll take you to the article, and that'll take you to the survey. So I again encourage everybody to check that out. The deadline for this, it's an anonymous survey. The deadline is April 30th. In terms of what we learned at the conference, the IIAR conference, International Institute of Ammonia Refrigeration is what that stands for. There were a number of companies throughout the conference who were showcasing low charge technology, and you can learn in detail about this in the new Accelerate America April issue that's coming out. Actually, it'll be posted online it was posted. It's available online now, actually, so you can learn in detail about it. I'll give you some highlights. For example, Hillphoenix, which is a well-known OEM based in the U.S. that does a lot of CO2 transcritical refrigeration for supermarkets and also for some industrial, has sold its first 2 low-charge ammonia package units from Nexcold with the Nexcold brand. This is their first time. What happened was that Hillphoenix acquired exclusive licensing rights to the Nexcold technology in the U.S. last September. They also have it for Mexico, Canada, and Latin America. And so they started selling them, and this is the first time that they've sold Nexcold units, and it's to a plant, a Drayton Foods plant in Fargo, North Dakota. What's notable about these Nexcold units is their extreme low charge. They call it ultra low charge because each of the units contains less than a pound of ammonia per ton of refrigeration. So the charge of these 2 units is less than 60 pounds total. So this enabled Drayton Foods to do an expansion of its plant without exceeding the 10,000 pounds of ammonia threshold that would make it much more subject to regulation in the United States. So
the 10,000 thing, it's like a big deal in the United States, isn't it, Michael? What
right.
regulations are on that limit?
If you're a cold storage operator and you use more than 10,000 pounds of ammonia refrigerant, you're subject to regulations from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and OSHA, so the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They each have these rules on safety that are very strict, extremely strict for operators using more than 10,000 pounds of ammonia. And so the idea is to use less than 10,000 pounds. You still have to follow safety procedures, but they're not as strict. And if you get inspected, you won't be subjected to fines if you don't meet them. So there's a considerable burden that you get rid of if you're under 10,000 pounds in terms of OSHA and EPA. So that's what happened with Nexcold. We also see another type of ammonia, low-charge ammonia system from Frick. It's not a package system the way Nexcold is. It's a central system, more of similar to a traditional ammonia system that uses a lot of ammonia, but this uses a smaller amount of ammonia, so it's considered a low charge system. It does that by through this what they call it the low charge central system. They've created these remote distributed condensing units, which basically are placed right near the evaporators. So all of the liquid is sort of concentrated in this one area where the condenser is and where the evaporators are, and the rest of the facility doesn't transfer liquid. It just transfers gas, and by doing that, you in effect cut down tremendously by 80%, in fact, the amount of ammonia used compared to a standard traditional liquid overfeed system. So it's basically a new sort of approach to low charge that Frick has created. And what they announced was that they've finished their second installation of this system in a Canadian cold storage facility. Last year they introduced this and put it in their first facility in the United States. So they're continuing with this. They've now done it in 2. So what we're seeing is just a lot of different a number of different approaches to low charge through packages, through centralized systems. But the ultimate goal is, again, to get rid of a lot of ammonia, make the operations safer, because ammonia is a toxic refrigerant, and to avoid some of the regulatory burden. And this is really quite a major development in the United States and North America, and I would say really on a global basis. And that's why our report that we're doing, which will really explain this in detail, all of the market developments of this, is going to be a very important report. And again, we're doing this survey to gather more information about it. All right, so I'm going to now move it back to Brussels, where Dario is going to tell us about a webinar that we're doing concerning the LifeFront project. Dario?
Yes, thanks, Michael. Yes, I'm working on the LifeFront project, which is a project that is funded by the European Union, in particular by the LIFE program. LIFE program is a fund that is indeed providing financial support for those projects that are working for the protection of the environment and for climate change policy. Indeed, the LifeFront project, in which Checo is involved as project leader together with other 5 European partners in other 3 different countries in Europe, it's a project that is working on hydrocarbons, and in particular FRONT stands for Flammable Refrigerants Options for Natural Technologies, improved standards and product design for their safe use. Indeed, the major objective of the project itself is tackling the standards and the regulations that are at the moment preventing, hindering wider adoption of hydrocarbons and other flammable refrigerants in the industry. And in doing so, we are working on several directions. For example, we are preparing a literature review and a market research on the current trends of the market in this industry. But together with the industry partners, we are preparing and putting together some databases and data collection in order to have a wider overview of what is going on and the state of play in this sector. So the webinar, it will be first of all on the 25th of April at 3 p.m. Brussels time, and it's going to be indeed online, free and public for everyone that is interested to attend the event. The expected duration is going to be 1 hour, and the contributions to the webinar will come from Checo and from some of the industry partners that are involved in the consortium. For Checo, I will be there to present with Clara Skakanova, the director of the market development team, and we are going to give a general overview of the project and the expected objectives, while the industry partners will go into more technical aspects and elements. And in particular, we will have Daniel Corborn, that is a British engineer that is working at HIT, and he will be presenting his research and his studies on the database for leak size and leak mass flow rates. In particular, the webinar will be interesting opportunity to show and to present the project to the relevant stakeholders that may come from trade bodies, the industry, not-for-profit organization, and so on and so forth, and in particular to present the Standards Action Group, that is a group to which interested individuals and stakeholders can access on a voluntary basis to give their contribution and feedback in working and analyzing the current standards that are present in the European Union regarding the adoption of natural refrigerants, in particular hydrocarbons and flammable refrigerants. So we will try to make the webinar interactive, also showing the participants to the event, the website of the project, and how they can practically get involved.
Okay, so it sounds like a very interesting webinar, interesting project. And so Dario, it sounds like one of the key objectives of the project is to consider the state of codes and standards that are standing in the way, perhaps, of natural refrigerant adoption.
Yes, exactly. That's basically the main objective of the project, and that is why one of the project partners indeed is ECOS. They have the office here in Brussels as well, and they are indeed expert in standardization on environmental issues. So the role of this project partner, as well as the role of the standard action group that I was introducing just a few seconds before, will be to contribute to create basically new standards and to propose so new regulation about the adoption of hydrocarbons in the European Union. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, clearly hydrocarbons are a fast developing natural refrigerants technology. There's a lot of interest in hydrocarbons, from a lot of sectors, and that there's a need to adjust the standard on in terms of the charge limit allowed. So that's something that's very important to getting more adoption of hydrocarbon systems, and in Europe as well as throughout the world, including North America, I would say.
Exactly. I would like just to add that to register to the webinar, interested participants can go to the website of the project, that is livefront.eu, and there they will find in the news section the link to register to the webinar, which I repeat is going to be on the 25th of April at 3 p.m. Brussels time.
Okay, so they would go to livefront.eu.
Exactly, yes.
And they'll see a link for the webinar.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Dario. Well, that wraps up today's NatRefs show. I want to thank my colleagues Charlotte, Dario, Andrew, and Devin. And thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time on the NatRefs show.